First things first, I'm about to talk a lot about Wicked and the nature of adaptation and whatever else it is that I talk about in this video, but let me get something very clear. No good deed fucks.
No good deed will I do.
It's easy. Anyone could sing this. I'm a bit late to the party with Wicked. I mean, I saw the stage show on a school trip when I was like 14, but I only watched the first film last week. And I had a lot of thoughts while I was watching Wicked. I thought thoughts such as, wait, how long is this movie? And, wow, this is a really long movie. And, I did not expect this movie to be this long. And, I wish I had a sody pop of some kind for this surprisingly long movie. But the most interesting thought I had, and what I want to talk about today, was this does not really feel like an adaptation of The Wizard of Oz. It doesn't feel like it has anything to do with The Wizard of Oz at all. That might sound strange. What the hell are you even talking about right now? I hear you cry. Of course it has something to do with The Wizard of Oz. It literally takes place in Oz, the place of which there is a wizard, whomst is of the place Oz. It features a bunch of the central characters, nearly all of them in fact. The Wizard of Oz is there. Obviously, it's like a prequel, or like a midquel, like The Lion King 1.5.
Behind the scenes for a revealing and intimate look at the story within the story.
Oh my god, lesbians! Lesbians, move out of my way! Let's go!
And look, I hear you, and you're not wrong. And I want to say right away that I'm not really criticizing Wicked for this. This is not a thing bad video, I am sorry to say. Wicked is... well, I have my opinions about Wicked, but that's not what this video is about. This video is about the nature of adaptation and Wicked's strange relationship to its source. What is Wicked? There is a lot of interesting material you can pull out of comparing an adaptation to its original, where they differ, where they stay the same when they ought to differ, and where they differ when they ought to stay the same. It's a bit subjective, of course, but I think you can absolutely tell when an adaptation has not really grasped the core appeal of the original or its core themes. And if you want to be more objective, you can talk about whether the adaptation succeeds at what it is attempting to do with the original material. Is it a straight adaptation, where changes are only made insofar as they are necessary to make the story work in the new medium, like The Lord of the Rings? Does it modernize a classic to make it accessible to unscholarly modern audiences, like 10 Things I Hate About You? Good movie, by the way. Does it basically invent a story where there previously wasn't one, like Cats, the musical? Or does it respond to bad faith and stupid pop feminist cinema sins-ass criticism of the original that didn't need addressing, and does it star Emma Watson, like, say, Greta Gerwig's 2019 film Little Women? Bit of a Little Women sideswipe there. Point is, there's lots of ways to do an adaptation and lots of things you can do with it. You can reinterpret, reimagine, modernize, expand upon, and more. But Wicked is sort of impossible to try to talk about in this same way, because it is not a reinterpretation, reimagining, modernization, or expansion upon its source material. Wikipedia calls it a revision, and other examples of revisionist literature are apparently things like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, or Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter. And look, that category appears to just mean is doing a completely different thing to the original thing it's based on, but is indeed based on something. And you might be fine with calling that adaptation, and happy to end the video now. Click away, bye, I'll see you later. But I don't know if I'm happy with that. You could also argue it is a retelling, considering it does hit most of the plot beats of Wizard of Oz, but I don't really agree. For one slightly complicated reason. See, Wicked is about the land of Oz, its politics, its power struggles, its heroes and its villains. And more than anything, Wicked is about Elphaba and the process that causes a woman to become a witch. The Wizard of Oz, on the other hand, is not about Oz. It's not about the nature of evil. It's not even about the wizard. The Wizard of Oz is about Dorothy. And I don't think we can consider it a retelling of the same story if it's not her eyes we are seeing through. That sounds kind of stupid, like I'm saying that retelling a story from a different perspective is inherently not adaptation, and that's not what I mean. I mean that in this specific case, the change in perspective is the reason for it not feeling like adaptation. Let me explain. We need to take a second to establish a genealogy of adaptation here. An adaptational family tree, if you will. Frank Baum writes the novel The Wonderful Wizard of Oz in 1900. It is adapted into the movie musical The Wizard of Oz with Judy Garland by MGM in 1939. Gregory Maguire writes Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West in 1995. Of course, this grimdark and cynical novel was the product of the grimdark and cynical 90s, which is then adapted back into a musical, Wicked, this time a stage show on Broadway, which is then adapted into the two films Wicked and Wicked for Good in 2024 and 2025 respectively. That's 4 layers of adaptation there. And that's not even mentioning the 1902 musical Baum wrote, which bears next to no resemblance to the Judy Garland version. It seems like it sucks kinda. I wouldn't worry about it.
Though I appear a handsome man, I'm only stuffed with straw.
Gregory Maguire's novel was influenced both by the original The Wonderful Wizard of Oz children's book and the 1939 film. Gregory Maguire's novel is also the place in the chain where the word adaptation first ceases to be true, in my opinion. Here there is a bit of a problem with my argument that The Wizard of Oz is not The Wizard of Oz without Dorothy, but I'm going to do my best to explain the problem and make my case. So, in the 1339 film, it is very apparent that it is about Dorothy working through her issues through an elaborate fantastical metaphor journey. The film is the most famous example of the just a dream trope done right. By establishing the characters of Oz as whimsical counterparts to real-world characters, the film is operating on the level of symbolic from the beginning, so it doesn't feel like a betrayal when we discover that Oz is indeed symbolic. Like, we knew that already. In the film, Oz exists for Dorothy to traverse it, and learn that the real brains and heart and courage are the friends we made along the way and yada yada, and come back to her normal life having changed, hero's journey styles. Without Dorothy, there is no Oz. In Frank Baum's novel, however, Oz is indeed a place. It is a location that exists, whether Dorothy is there or not. Auntie Em and Uncle Henry move to Oz at some point. In this version, Oz does not really exist for Dorothy. It is not a symbolic mirror dimension dream space designed to reflect Dorothy's real-world problems. Without Dorothy, Oz goes on as it always has. It is not so strange, then, to imagine a story set in Oz that does not directly involve Dorothy. Even a grimdark story.
There's a darkness here. Something wicked.
There is material there to extrapolate a politics of Oz. There is plenty of slavery and power struggle. Wicked did not come from nowhere. Except, I would argue that even the Oz of the novel is still for Dorothy, just in a less direct sense. And to explain what I mean, I think it would be helpful to compare it to its closest cousin, Alice in Wonderland. Alice in Wonderland and The Wonderful Wizard of Oz share a very similar premise and a similar narrative structure and have similar aims. There is a young girl with not much on, and through happenstances and occurrences, they find themselves in a magical world they must traverse through, encountering much whimsy along the way. They are episodic, in a very, and then this happened, and then that happened sort of way. much like The Hobbit, incidentally. It's odd to think that The Hobbit is more like Alice in Wonderland than it is Lord of the Rings. But it is. Give me the movie this scene was supposed to be in. Whimsical ass. But anyway, in the case of Alice and Hobbit, they were such because they were stories that Carroll and Tolkien were telling actual children long before either were novels. They weren't written. They were sort of improv'd. Alice in Wonderland was actually being told to the real-life child, Alice Little. And you can imagine that, right? You can imagine trying to come up with the next exciting thing to happen to make a kid giggle, or thrill them, or make them go, cool! What Alice in Wonderland is designed to do is, well, to please a child. And so Wonderland may be a place anyone could find if they went down the right rabbit hole, but Alice in Wonderland is a story that exists for Alice. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz was not a bedtime story turned children's novel, but the same sensibility is very much present. I would be surprised if Baum was not strongly influenced by Carroll, Alice in Wonderland having been published in 1865, when Baum would have been 9 years old. Alice in Wonderland is notedly not didactic in the way children's literature often is. Didactic here meaning having a clear and unambiguous message, or telling you what to think. It resolutely refuses to have a moral. The character of the Duchess seems to be poking fun at the idea that it needs a moral at all, as she assigns arbitrary, nonsensical morals to any old shit. "'Tis so," said the Duchess, "and the moral of that is, oh, 'tis love that makes the world go round." How fond she is of finding morals in things, Alice thought to herself.
You're thinking about something, my dear, and that makes you forget to talk. I can't tell you just now what the moral of that is, but I shall remember it in a bit.
Now compare that to the preface that Baum wrote for The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Folklore, legends, myths, and fairy tales have followed children through the ages, for every healthy youngster has a wholesome and instinctive love for stories fantastic, marvelous, and manifestly unreal. But, he says, children no longer need the old morality tales. They get plenty of morality in their education. So all they're looking for in a fairy story now is entertainment. Having this thought in mind, Baum writes, the story of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz was written solely to please children of today. I get the sense that both Carroll and Baum are being a little bit tongue-in-cheek here, but either way, you can see the symmetry between their approaches to children's literature. So I'd argue, the same way that Alice in Wonderland is for Alice, the real child that is Alice, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz is for Dorothy, in a manner of speaking, for the real child who experiences Oz through Dorothy's eyes. Oz would not exist without her. And so there is something strange when Gregory Maguire looks at all that, pays it no mind, and then invents an Oz that exists outside of Dorothy, where the child's eyes that create the world are simply not present. For comparison, the 2010 Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland chose to tell a completely original story, but it kept Alice. Wonderland still exists for Alice. We still see it through Alice's eyes. Indeed, her child eyes are still what the story is about, and so it still feels like adaptation, even though the content is all new. It is adaptation by expansion. Without Dorothy, Wicked doesn't feel like adaptation to me anymore. It is a different thing entirely, a thing all of its own. The elements that it borrows aren't part of the essence of the source material. They're the surface dressing. Adaptation to me is like the ship of Theseus. Rearrange the boards, replace some, and at a certain undefinable point it may no longer be the same ship, but it is still a ship. It still floats on water and goes from one place to another. Wicked is like if you took the boards and built a house. It's made of all the same stuff, but that's not a ship. You've made a different thing. And that's not a bad thing by any means, and I much prefer an original story to the cynical cash grab of most contemporary adaptations. Yes, I'm looking at you, Disney. Your crimes against art will lock the gates of heaven against you. But it does feel strangely arbitrary to me. Like there is no particular reason that Wicked needed to be what it is. Didn't need to be based on Wizard of Oz. Could have been made out of anything. And it turns out that is sort of true.
Well, I was living in London when I really had the compulsion to write a story about evil. I didn't know immediately that it was going to involve the Wicked Witch of the West.
Maguire was apparently contemplating how people get to be evil, and how we must dehumanize people, say they are evil, in order to hate them.
And I've been a writer for children. Are there any evil characters in children's books? And immediately a vision of Margaret Hamilton arose up in front of me saying, "I'll get you and your little dog." And I thought, Jesus, Mary and Joseph, I've just had a vision, and it isn't the Virgin Mary coming down out of the clouds, it's Margaret Hamilton. And she has something to say to me, and I better pick up my pen and write it down.
My goodness. Jesus, Mary and Joseph. It's just interesting to me. It could just as easily have been about, as a random non-specific example, Cruella de Vil. Or, as a second random non-specific example, Maleficent. But Elphaba it was. So what is Wicked? Well, it's a house rather than a ship. And a house is good for staying as much as a ship is good for going. But a house is a house and a ship is a ship, and if you liked the ship so much, why'd you build a house out of it? Certainly Wicked and Wicked is Wicked, but Wicked is not the Wizard of Oz. I don't know if you can tell that I read a fair bit of children's literature in the making of this video. Lewis Carroll is a fantastic writer.
I know what you're thinking, but it isn't so nohow. Contrariwise, if it was so, it might be. But as it isn't, it ain't.
Anyway, so Wicked feels strange to me. I find it suspension of disbelief breaking almost. Uncanny. Because I recognize this world and I recognize these characters, but I can't quite understand why I should be here in this world with these characters. And I think this speaks to why Maleficent feels strange, and why Cruella especially felt strange. They did not need to be what they were. Houses made out of ships. And that's alright. It's fine to be a house. If what you've got is a ship, but what you need is a house, you can build a house out of it, and if you do a good job, I will look at your house and say, yep, that's a nice house. But you'll never be able to scrub out the faint smell of the ocean. And maybe that's the point. You know, I was going to end the video there. Just a quick little muse on adaptation and the essence of a text. Job done, pack it in, next project.
Rounding the corner with a bunch of lesbians! Here we are, Manhattan! Can you handle it?
But then I saw Wicked for Good. And you know, I'd already seen the stage show, so no huge surprises here. But it did get me thinking. As a media literacy genius, something I've noticed with the two-act structure of stage shows is that the first act will set up a whole bunch of pins, and the second act will knock them all down. That is almost certainly a very basic day one Performing Arts 101 observation, but I didn't study performing arts and I hadn't noticed it yet. Shut up. Don't be rude. So the second act's job is to take all the stuff that's been set up in the first act and recontextualize it. The first act of Into the Woods is the fairy tale happily ever after.
Once upon a time.
And the second act is after the happily ever after.
Once upon a time. Later.
Which recontextualizes the fairy tales upon which the play is based. You get it. The pins that the first act of Wicked is setting up is basically moving the characters into something roughly approaching their starting positions. Then, one by one, the second act knocks them all down, which recontextualizes the fairy tale? No, hang on. The second act recontextualizes what the first act sets up. The second act is the retelling of the events of The Wizard of Oz. So, Wicked isn't recontextualizing The Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz is being used to recontextualize Wicked. Holy shit, I really am a media literacy genius. I think illustrative of the thing that I'm talking about here is the original number that was written specifically for the film, No Place Like Home.
But there's no place like home.
What is evoking that phrase doing for this text? Does it tell us something new about the Wizard of Oz? Does it make us see the Wizard of Oz in a new way? Well, this is pretty subjective, but I think, yes, this does tell us something new about the Wizard of Oz, but I think it does so in order to position Elphaba in relation to it. This allusion invites us to compare Elphaba to Dorothy, and the comparison doesn't really reflect that well on Dorothy. Like, she's a good kid and all, but Dorothy is a lot like Galinda. She has privilege in the sense that she can opt out of the injustices of the world if she wants to.
But nobody can see the Great Oz. Nobody's ever seen the Great Oz. Even I've never seen him.
Oh, please, please, sir. I've got to see the wizard.
Come on in!
Dorothy gets to have her adventures and then click her heels 3 times and head off back to her nice family who love her. For her, home is home. For Elphaba, home is something she has to fight for, something she is not afforded by default because of her social position. The invocation of that famous line shows us what Elphaba is by showing us what Elphaba is not. And Elphaba is not Dorothy. One of the magic things about art to me is how densely you can pack meaning into it, with allusions and symbols and borrowed imagery and recontextualization. Wicked may not be adapting The Wizard of Oz, but it is using The Wizard of Oz. It's borrowing our pre-existing understanding of the themes and ideas of Wizard of Oz in order to communicate its own themes and ideas more effectively. The Wizard of Oz, the 1939 musical, becomes the propaganda, the way Elphaba is constructed by the public, the narrative mechanism by which Elphaba is othered and dehumanized. The actual events of that story, and even the essence of it in the child's perspective, are not important for Wicked's purposes.
I swear it never ends with that girl.
What it's interested in is a feeling, an aesthetic, and an implicit worldview. An innocent, simplistic, black and white, metaphorically, story about a girl who is good and a witch that is bad. So it's okay when we hoot and holler and cheer for her death. And you liked it. Your positive feelings for The Wizard of Oz are being used here too, to remind you that you are not immune to propaganda. Make no mistake, this is not a mindless, cynical product based on an existing IP just for the fuck of it, like Cruella. There's thought here. There's intent. It's pretty clever, actually. I started out this video talking about ways of talking about adaptations. Talking about. Not good. Who wrote this? Comparing what it changes, what it keeps the same, all that shit. And how you couldn't really do that with Wicked. And it's true, Wicked is not The Wizard of Oz. But you can ask a lot of interesting questions about how it is using The Wizard of Oz. Whether the stage show or the films or the novel use it more effectively, what implications it brings, what happens to The Wizard of Oz in this framing, and what The Wizard of Oz does for Wicked. And I have my opinions about all of that. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about the nature of adaptation and why Wicked is built out of the material it's built from. Yes, Wicked is a house made out of a ship, but there is something affecting about standing inside a house, knowing that every board was once part of a ship, that this house has traveled the world. The house becomes more than the thing it is, because you will always be aware of the faint smell of the ocean. So that's the video. I hope that you liked it. If you did like it, make sure that you press the button to like it, so that because then I know. Otherwise, I don't really have any way of knowing, which is a very strange position to be in. I learned a lot making this one. Not really sure if it's good at this point. You know, working on it for so long and reworking it a couple of times, it sort of feels patchwork to me. So let me know what you think. Tell me all of your thoughts, please. Tell me every single thought that you have. Thank you. I'm thinking for my New Year's resolution this year, I might try being a YouTuber who makes videos.
I can't tell you just now what the moral of that is, but I shall remember it in a bit.
Perhaps it hasn't one.
Tut, tut, child. Everything's got a moral, if only you can find it.